Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this special webinar called Anticipating the New Normal, Critical Changes to Plan Today. I'm Laurie Ross from Smith School of Business at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Smith is proud to be partnering with the City of Kingston and Kingston Economic Development to bring you this community classroom, a series of weekly webinars by Smith faculty to help local businesses and not-for-profits cope with the impact of COVID-19. Before I introduce today's speaker, I have a couple of quick things. First, today's discussion will be recorded. We'll post a link to that recording on the website where you registered for today's webinar. Second, you'll be able to pose a question at any time to our speaker. To do that, please use the Q&A button. It's at the bottom of your screen, and Ken will be answering those questions at the end. Third and final point, we have two polling questions right now that we'd like to show you to find out who's joined us today for the community classroom. We're going to open the first poll. So thinking of the primary business or organization you represent, how would you classify it? Please select just one, and there are a total of 10 choices. You'll see them all by using the scroll bar that's on the right side of the polling question window. Take a few moments to choose that, then hit submit, and we'll show the results. Okay, let's close the poll and see the results. So a good representation of not-for-profits, some retail, food services, public administration professionals, healthcare, a good arrangement, a good assortment of organizations for joining us. Thank you. Let's go to the second poll question. So thinking of the primary organization you represent, and based on your current view of what may come over the next 4 to 6 months, how would you assess the prospects for your organization? Please just select one. Take a few moments and then hit submit. Okay, just a couple more seconds. All right, we're going to end that poll and take a look at the results. All right, yeah, we've got some optimists here. We're adapting, we're pivoting. That's good. If you are struggling, I know Ken will have a lot to say today that'll address all of these concerns. So thank you for participating. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Ken Wong. Ken is the Distinguished Professor of Marketing at Smith School of Business. Ken has received numerous awards for his courses in strategic planning, marketing, and business strategy. Most recently, he was named an inductee into the Canadian Marketing Hall of Legends. In 1998, Ken won the Financial Post Leaders in Management Education Award, a Lifetime Achievement Award for his work in undergraduate, MBA, and executive development programs. Ken's work has been featured in numerous social media, and he frequently is asked to address global audiences on matters of business strategy, branding, pricing, and retail practice. Ken also sits on a number of advisory boards and boards of directors. Thanks for being here today, Ken.
Thank you, Laurie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon to talk a little bit about coronavirus and to give my opinion, and I do stress it's an opinion, as to what our so-called new normal is going to look like post-COVID-19. Obviously in the hopes that we can prepare ourselves now for what we're going to have to deal with in the future. That said, we're going to have to undertake a little bit of a different kind of approach to this topic. Normally speakers will present you with an array of facts that build to a conclusion. I'm going to come at it a little bit differently because, to be honest with you, I don't think anybody really knows what the new normal is going to be. And so what I've done is I've curated the views of some major consulting firms, some ad agencies, some packaged goods manufacturers, major ones, national chains, and some local merchants to see if I could come up with a consensus opinion of what the world will look like when the dust finally settles. And I thought I'd do that, and then I'd spend about 20, 30 minutes talking to you about why that view exists. And once you have that understanding, we can sit back and ask ourselves the question, is that what's going to happen in Kingston, or are we, for some reason, different, or are we prepared to do some things to make things a little bit different? So let me start with what may be seen by some of you as some very bad news. Here is the consensus view, the view that major firms are attending to as to what the so-called new normal will be. This comes from an article that was published in the distinguished publication, The Atlantic, just 2 days ago. I'll read it to you in case you can't see the print. We're entering an evolutionary stage of retail in which big companies will get bigger, many mom and pop dreams will burst, chains will proliferate and flatten the idiosyncrasies of many neighborhoods. More economic activity will flow to e-commerce, and restaurants will undergo a transformation unlike anything the industry has experienced since the Prohibition. That's the consensus view. And I think for obvious reasons, you'll understand, I hope it's not true, especially in the context of Kingston. Let's start to take a look at it, but before, I have to offer a few qualifications, because to be honest with you, this has been one of the most difficult presentations for me to script in my 38 years at Queen's and at Smith. It makes it hard because the data is so inadequate. We don't know even to this day whether or not our numbers are correct. We've seen reports that the incidence of COVID-19 may be understated by as much as 10 times. We've heard reports it may be overstated. Nobody really knows. And there's no precedent that we can fall back on. When I did my search, the closest thing I could come to this would be the great influenza of 1918, almost 100 years ago, when 675,000 Americans died as a result of the influenza. Unfortunately, we can't learn a whole lot about that because our markets are dramatically different from that period. It's also made difficult because a lot of what we would normally expect the so-called free market to take care of, that free market has been suspended indefinitely. And of course, it's been suspended indefinitely by government trying to safeguard the health and welfare of its constituents.
Ken,
Yes.
It's Laurie here. Can I interrupt you for a moment? We're not seeing your screen, your PowerPoints.
You're not seeing
Would you mind sharing your screen?
Yeah, I thought I had. Let me double check that, Laurie. Hang on. Are you sharing it now?
We can see it. Just pop it into the presentation view and we'll get rolling again.
There we go, on the Spot Adaptation.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, no problem. So we had talked about these 2 points here. One thing I do want to stress is that we're going to have to rely upon some macro data from the province and obviously from the federal government in order to draw some conclusions. And in terms of whether or not that will apply to Kingston, I think it's important to bear in mind that we have a somewhat distinctive profile relative to the rest of Ontario and in fact Canada. We are an older community. As you can see, our median age is only roughly half a year older. What's significant though is the percentage over 65. We are almost a third larger in terms of the percent of our population over 65 than the rest of Ontario. And actually that's a point of some pride for us because we have not been ravaged with COVID-19 the way many other communities have. And yet you would have expected that because those over 65 are more vulnerable and those that travel, and you'll recall that COVID happened during our spring break, this could have been a really disastrous experience for Kingston. And I think it really says something about our municipal government, about our provincial government, and the administration, frankly, at Queen's, if we can blow our own horn for a bit, that we were able to keep a lid on this as well as we have. Kingston is also a slightly wealthier community than the rest of the province, and that may surprise some people. But again, you have to look at this from the perspective of where does that wealth lie? Because the wealth is not distributed evenly. As you'll see, larger families, couples with children, probably two-income families, they would have the greatest median after-tax income by family type. And at $100,000, and this is 2015 dollars, that's a fairly affluent consumer. By contrast, when we look at younger people who are not in families, who are single, we can see that they're really scraping by on less than $30,000 a year after tax. And when we look at median after-tax income by age, for those who think that having seniors means we have access to people flush with retirement dollars, as you can see, that is not the case. The average person age 65 and over in the last census, $32,000, 5 more than the rest of the province, but 10,000 less than people 35 to 54. So Kingston has this distinct profile, and as you'll see, this becomes very important because economic factors will play into this enormously as we get into our discussion. I also want to note that in forming this opinion, I really have 3 key premises that I'm going to be stressing and I'll be coming back to repeatedly. The first is that customer experiences shapes a society, and business responses in turn shape their destiny. And if you find that hard to believe or you find that a little wishy-washy, let me give you 3 words to think about. Depression era baby. When we talk about someone as a Depression era baby, what comes to mind? Caution, concern over their finances, a little bit of risk aversion. And that translated into the business world in a major way when products like credit cards became available. If you were a Depression era baby, you were very reluctant to spend what you didn't have in the bank. By contrast, if you were a younger person, you probably welcomed the opportunity to buy in advance of having the income to pay for it. And so there is no question that COVID-19 is going to shape how people act, what their priorities are, and of course, what their purchases are. Second thing I'd like to emphasize here is that there is no new normal. The concept of a new normal suggests that there's going to be some stable period of time when everything will be unchanged, and so we can start to form a business response to it. What we're going to find is that there's going to be a series of new normals. Let's call it your next normal, if you will. And that means that businesses are going to move through 3 very distinct phases, and each phase will have a distinct set of tasks, and hopefully all will make it, but in probability, not all will make it through the 3rd stage. Your first chore will be to survive, just to get through this initial onslaught. We'll talk about this and what it involves a little bit later on. The second is to revive the business so that when the conditions, the restrictive conditions are lifted, can we recapture our previous glory? And then of course, stage 3 will be preparing for what will be the long-term impact. Final note, and this is, I think, the most important one of these 3. And that is that anyone who believes that there is a pre-COVID normality that we will return to is probably smoking something which until recently was illegal. This is not going to happen. This is not an economic recession that we're recovering from. This is something that strikes at the most fundamental of our concerns, and that is our health and welfare. And it's going to lead to a series of economic and behavioral streams that are going to change how we think. And as a consequence, companies are going to have to rely either on their brain, their smarts, or their brawn, their size, in order to survive. And those will be 2 very distinct strategies that we'll see companies take moving forward. Some will use their size in ways that I'll talk about a little bit later. And for those who aren't big, which means most of Kingston, we're just going to have to be a little bit small. Hello, am I still there?
I think you're back on now.
Are we okay now?
Yeah, I think we're okay now. If you want to share your screen again, please. Sorry about the interruption.
All right, we'll see if we can do it. Uh, hmm.
Yeah, I think everyone lost you, Ken. So
All right, where did you lose me, Lori?
it was not very, yeah, let's see. I think it's only been a minute or so.
Did you hear me make my comment about the return to pre-COVID-19 life is unlikely?
No, but you better start there.
All right, well, let me
Sounds
start
important.
there because that's the most important point. Anyone who believes that this is just like coming out of the recession of 2008 or any other time, they are patently wrong, period. And on that, there is, in my mind, no discussion open. This is not like an economic recession. Economic recessions, we are controlling the source of the problem. We have tools that we know will work on it. This is a virus. This attacks a fundamental human concern, the most fundamental human concern, and that is, of course, survival. And so it's going to impact tremendously changes in people's actions, their attitudes, and their priorities. And as a result, what we're going to see coming out the other end is two very distinct responses from business. Some businesses will win because they're big and they're strong, and others will win because they're simply more smarter and more agile. And clearly here in Kingston, we're going to have to rely upon the latter, our brains and our agility, more than our size in order to survive in this environment. And the final comment here was really just to say, not everything you're going to hear can be tied back to COVID-19. I mean, I realized people started hoarding toilet paper as a response to this epidemic. I haven't found anybody who's been able to give me a rationale for why that occurred. So let's just forget about hoarding toilet paper for a moment. We'll pass it off as cocktail conversation. And let's concentrate on the really important things, which is, what are we going to have to do here to get through to the next stages? The first thing we have to do is the stage we're currently in, and that's survival. And survival is really all about managing cash flow just to keep the lights on. I'm not going to focus a lot here, but I've tried to highlight, I think, the four things that most people will be doing. You're going to have to focus on generating some inflows, forward selling gift cards and the like. Make sure you collect your receivables. Offer alternative ways for consumers to access your product, curbside home delivery. Keep the revenues as high as you possibly can, and don't go dark on your customers. Because one thing we know is that in times of recovery, if you cut your brand budget and go dark, it'll take you a long, long time in order to recover. Secondly, and this really tees up Shay Dubai's presentation next week, delay payments or negotiate payment deferrals, especially in things like rent. We are already hearing in the States that as much as 35% of mall tenants are refusing to pay rent. In some centers in the States, companies are basically saying, we won't pay rent if our store isn't open. And so if government imposes it, they'll be factoring that into new leases and the like. From the consumer side, price, availability, and hygiene will drive consumer preference. I'm a marketer. We talk about forming emotional bonds with consumers. We talk about the aesthetic. We talk about all of the things that we can do over and above providing a product that will drive consumers to our stores. And yet we know in this stage, price, availability, and hygiene are the big factors. And I've spoken to a lot of folks in ad agencies, and we all say the same thing. If 2 months ago you had told me that I would be telling clients, major clients, focus on availability and hygiene in order to win the consumer's heart, people would have looked at me very strangely. but we've come back to that. We're down to that lowest level of human concern again, and that is survival. It is not with self-actualization and other grandiose objectives. And then finally, we do know if you take care of your people will take care of your customers, and your customers will take care of you. The best firms in this situation aren't simply saying to employees, so bad, terrible to be you, but our doors aren't open, so we're laying you off. When you lay those people off, you may not be able to hire them coming back. When they do come back, they may not come back with the enthusiasm to deliver customer satisfaction. Remember that the single most important person impacting on your customer's satisfaction and experience is not you, the owner. It is the frontline person they deal with every day. And as you'll see, our mindset towards frontline people has changed dramatically in the last 6 to 7 weeks. One thing I want to encourage you, though, is that while we're all closed, it's a good time to sit back and think. And take that time to ask yourself some questions you might not normally consider in the bump and grind of getting through a day. And so here are some things I'd like to suggest you think about. We'll make this slide deck available to all of you, by the way, so don't bother taking notes. Just some things to think about, and in particular, focus on this last line. How do you add value beyond having the product or service available? Answer that question first, and then answer it after you've answered the 2 questions above, and see if it still makes sense. Here's what our surveys and studies tell us has changed in the last 6 weeks. This is what's going to frame consumer behavior going forward. And as you go through this, ask yourself the question, what coping behaviors could become habits? Now, we know from research that habits start forming after anywhere from 21 to 28 days. We're now 7 weeks into this crisis, so we're starting to see some habits forming already. And these habits will persist for some time post-COVID-19. First, we have some mindset shifts. And the source here is an Angus Reid survey that was done. And I think the most important line here is the first one. Feelings of concern over finances, the well-being of loved ones, and access to personal protection equipment and other essentials continues to rise as stage 1 drags on. This is about priorities. And priorities dictate what we pay attention to, what messaging we pay attention to, what people we pay attention to. It reflects what stores we go to, what products we buy. And so if you think about what we're seeing here is all of a sudden, there's maybe a little bit less concern over socializing, a little bit less concern over our self-image, more concern with the basics of life and making certain that it continues. And that's not surprising, because what we've also seen is that the skepticism about whether COVID-19 was real or not, I think that's pretty well been settled. And now the bigger concern is over premature reopening of the economy. In fact, if you think about the states, Georgia just the other day reopened their economy. And I believe the last number I saw was 45% of the restaurants and bars refused to open. They were allowed to open, but they refused to open. And the rationale was actually quite simple. We're not going to have any customers. Whether governments try to control the narrative or not, it doesn't matter. The reality is consumers will do what consumers feel is in their best interest. And when their priority is health, that's going to drive everything else. So for those of you who are sitting around believing that once the dust settles, everybody's going to want to go out and do a big group hug and have a big party, not likely, not likely. The return to that environment will be gradual, and it will be very slow. You'll notice, by the way, here on the last line, frontline staff positioned in a heroic capacity. We have seen concerts from the States and Canada featuring our frontline staff. People are saying thank you to them in stores. They're saying thank you to their doctors and nurses. They're saying thank you to their delivery people. We're not seeing these people as invisible anymore. We're coming to realize the vital role they play. And the Premier, Ford, has even translated that into some economic reality by giving them an hourly raise and the promise of a bonus for all their hard work. This frontline staff represent a potential asset that may help you revive and thrive your business. But again, we'll talk some more about that in a moment. A huge behavioral shift is the avoidance of public places due to healthcare guidance. And that may seem simple and obvious, but just to really draw out the implications of this. Will we have a homecoming this fall? Will we have an orientation period? Will there be a Feb Fest, a Blues Fest? Will there be a Buskers this summer? These are events that draw people to our downtown and maintain our retail capability. And yet, they may all be canceled. And when you think about the second and third order consequences of the cancellation of those events, the empty hotel rooms, we don't know when we'll see another performance in the Leon Center, sporting or otherwise. This is probably one of the biggest drivers of what our so-called next normal is going to be. Secondly, there's no question that this isolation process is leading to some strains on people's mental health. Loneliness is coming up. We're seeing a need for human contact, not necessarily the human physical touch, but certainly we're seeing the need for contact. And that's why you're seeing this enormous boom in the use of FaceTime and Zoom and other video calling technologies. We have this compelling desire to stay in touch with people and stay in touch with the world. And we are being as innovative as we can. And I think what you're going to start to see now as a result of this is not only incredible stock prices for things like Zoom, which has, I think, more than quadrupled its stock price since COVID came out. But we're also going to see dramatic improvements in technology and new technologies to make all of this a little less cumbersome. And then on the consumption side, we've already seen increased attention to nesting and do-it-yourself products. As people can't get these things, obviously they have to do it themselves. And so one of the most bizarre circumstances I've ever seen, Robinhood had to stop shipping out flour because they ran out of packages for the flour because everybody's baking cakes and cooking at home all of a sudden. L'Oreal tells me that their hair coloring sales are up 50% because nobody can get into a salon for a blowout or a dye touch-up. And at least in the States, online adult education is hitting near record levels as people are taking advantage of the isolation to learn a new language, learn how to play an instrument, and the like. So we are seeing some opportunities arise, albeit in areas that maybe we didn't focus on as much pre-COVID as we will have to post-COVID. Luxury goods and discretionary products, as you can imagine, their sales are down and they will decline further. The big difference here, though, is whether or not the premium product is premium priced because it has higher quality or premium priced because it has an image-based advantage. If you are counting on image to carry the day for you, good luck, because that's not going to be the reality. People will be buying products and paying for products that deliver functional benefits. And so we're already seeing right now the reduced social meeting space has led to a decline in lipstick and other color cosmetics by about 35%. I was teasing a faculty member here at Smith the other day, and I said, you know, I'd love to see if we teach on Zoom for another year, what happens to our wardrobe spending, because we'll all be spending money on shirts and ties and wearing sweatpants under the desk where no one can see us. Those are the kinds of behaviors, though, that you really do see in this kind of an environment. When we look at how people buy, as you can see, the first two categories really say something about the fact people want to buy in bulk. They want to minimize the trips to the store. And so if you're typically selling smaller sizes, obviously you're not going to see quite as many consumers as you used to. It also suggests that you may want to start offering volume discounts or some way of encouraging people so that if they do buy in greater quantities, as clearly they want to, they'll be able to get it from you. You're also seeing in the next three categories: buy hygiene products, buy healthier food, get someone else to go to grocery shopping for me. Again, those are the health concerns rising to the top. And interestingly, if we look at the next line, buy extra single food use, what this tells me is we are going to put our health perhaps even ahead of the environment. Right? The great complaint about single use is that they are environmentally unfriendly, but if the alternative is to drink from a contaminated container, well, perhaps that's not a trade-off we're prepared to make. And then this is something specific to Kingston because we have some new businesses in town. And that is that 8% of the population claim they have avoided purchasing goods from countries that have been affected by coronavirus. And so if you are a Chinese manufacturer looking to sell in North America, you may well want to make certain that you have a North American facility to ship from so that you can say you are North American made as opposed to made in China, because there may be a backlash to that. If we look at how people spend their time, what I find really interesting here is that it really breaks out into three categories. So what do people do when there's nothing else to do? Well, we talk to other people, video calls, social media, texting, and the like. We consume media. We watch streaming TV, we surf the internet, we watch cable. And the only other thing on that list, we cook. We make meals, we bake at home, we try new recipes. And as you'll see a little bit later, if that grows, that has massive implications for our hospitality trades, and in particular, the restaurant business. You'll also notice, if you look below the line here, getting to locations is becoming very difficult. Whether it's Uber, Lyft, taxis, public transit, or driving, we are reluctant to step out of our shells. And part of this, of course, is the fact that we haven't been allowed to, but part of it as well is a natural reluctance to go where other people are. If we look at where people shop, and again, we have to condition this interpretation with the fact that we haven't been able to go everywhere we might have wanted to go. But what you're seeing is grocery, of course, the essentials. Everybody's still going there. Retail, a little bit less so, but you know, if it's essential products, drugs, for example, prescription products, we may well have to go to those drugstores. But then restaurants, malls, movie theaters, and airports, if you are in those businesses or if you are supporting those businesses, you're going to have a very long climb back, unfortunately. I'll give you some ideas for how to do it, but it's going to be a very, very long climb back. The biggest, however, behavioral change is this one right here. The fact that consumer price awareness and price sensitivity are going to go through the roof. We're already seeing this. When Ford announced his war on price gouging, he invited the public to report the price they were paying for products that they felt were being they were being gouged. There have in those 2 weeks over 16,000 cases of price gouging reported by consumers. There is absolutely no way that we are gouging people in 16,000 different product categories. There is absolutely no way that we have that kind of widespread self-interest being demonstrated by business. What we are seeing, however, is most people probably don't know the price of the products they were buying, and when they are informed of it, they're somewhat surprised. For example, just for fun the other day, I called up 10 friends and asked them how much a liter of milk was. Only one could tell me within 25 cents. And when the others heard what a liter of milk now goes for, they were absolutely shocked and felt it had to be some kind of price gouging. It's not. Prices can go up because raw materials get more expensive, and we're going to see some of that. They can go up because transportation gets more expensive, and we're going to see some of that. And prices can go up because there's a whole lot of costs that have to be now covered that didn't exist before. So think about protective equipment for store cashiers, for example. Those expenses have to be recovered in some way. And so there may be, in some instances, very legitimate reasons why prices go up that don't really represent what we would call price gouging. But people will be paying attention to it, and they'll be using the internet to find reference prices. And that's problematic if you're in Kingston, because who's to say that the factors leading to our costs and therefore the price of products in Kingston is the same as the factors leading to costs and the price of products, let's say in Beijing, China. Two different circumstances, but we will expect the local merchant to come close to that Chinese price. And then, of course, income is just going to be down, right? Governments are giving us money, but not all of it is grant. Much of it is in the form of loans. Some of it will have to be repaid. And that's going to create a tremendous strain on businesses and a tremendous strain on workers, many of whom I think falsely believe that this money they're getting is all grant. The reality is it's taxable. And so whatever you do, you're going to have to save some of it to pay the tax bill when the tax person comes charging. Gig economy workers, people who are on contract, casual workers, we already know they're scrambling to meet rent, mortgage, credit card bills, and they're trying to do it all at a time when we know household debt in this country is at absolute record highs. We are going to become a place where some consumers are simply going to say, I may not want it, but this is all I can afford, and this is the way I'm going to go. And it's not hard to see why. These are the highest levels Angus Reid has seen in the last, I think it's 20, 30 years, of the percentage of Canadians who are very or extremely concerned about the Canadian economy, and those who are very and extremely concerned about personal finance. The Canadian economy, I think, is a little bit higher, perhaps, only because it has both the concern over COVID and, of course, the concern over oil prices and the oil pipeline and the like. But this is not a consumer who is going to be stepping out saying, geez, I'm flush with cash and nothing to do with it. Now you're going to be looking at a consumer who's going to have things that they want to do with it, but maybe not the cash to do it. Technology has also shifted, and that's the fourth big variable here. Social distancing is driving the adoption of new technologies. You know, video conferencing is a great example. We at Queen's at Smith, we are amongst the world leaders in the use of video conferencing for education, but we've never taken it really outside of the context of our distance programs. Now that we have COVID-19, we're talking about remote delivery of lectures to our residential students even. And so all of a sudden now we're really having to take this technology, this expertise. We can't delay anymore. We have to bring it to market today. And you're seeing this with the use of contactless payment. Who would have ever thought that the key to winning the consumer's heart would be to say, oh, by the way, you'll never have to talk to another person. You'll never have to touch them. You'll never have to be within 6 feet of them. And yet that's a driving factor in shaping how the consumer will behave. Even e-commerce, you know, we had people who were very reluctant to use e-commerce prior to this. They just had a preference, a personal preference, and that's fine. But the last estimate I saw is that e-commerce was, prior to COVID, growing at about 1% share of the retail sales in the US per year. Currently represents about 15% of US retail sales are through e-commerce. Post-COVID already, they are estimating that for 2020, it's going to jump to 25%. That's basically 10 years worth of e-commerce evolution squeezed into 4 or 5 months. It's going to have a dramatic impact, and people will get used to e-commerce. It will become a habit. Now think about this in the context of Kingston, where the drive from Kingston East to Kingston West is often seen by people as a trip across the universe, where our biggest concern is, well, I'm going to shop if I can park outside the door of the store. How does that compare to e-commerce, where you order it and they deliver it under normal circumstance within 2, 3, 4 days straight to your home? People who maybe were skeptical before will now be happy to jump on board. We also know that media and content consumption, this is a good thing actually. Think about it. I can tell you where all my friends are right now. You know where they are? They're at home. They're at home consuming media. Probably not listening to me, but consuming media. And so we have this opportunity to reach a broader cross-section of people than we have ever had before. And there will be efficiencies. Advertising will fall off. There's no question you're going to be able to buy your advertising at lower prices. People will be asking for rate reductions from ad agencies and media. The conditions here for the use of advertising, if you're the right kind of firm, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, opportunity has never been better. And then finally, the big technology shift, and it's the one everyone is now talking about, and it's the role of analytics, monitoring, and modeling in determining when to reopen the economy. We're talking now, Australia has already announced that they're going to be circulating an app that will let them maintain knowledge of where people are, so that if you've been in contact with someone who's contracted COVID, they'll know how to track you. It's a great idea. You can understand why they want to do it. But I also heard Ann Kevorkian, our privacy commissioner, yesterday talking about some of the privacy concerns that this can bring up. Even Zoom, with all of its growth in this environment, people are still concerned about privacy. It's almost like we're going back to the old days of really being concerned with what matters most. What matters most is kind of staying alive. How long will it be till the end of the survival stage? Well, that really depends on government. Ontario has already announced its 3-stage plan to reopen. Based on what I hear locally, we are probably nearing conditions where Kingston will be able to move out of phase 1 and into phase 2. It may not be until the end of the summer. We don't know yet, but clearly we are in relatively good shape, again, because I think our municipal leaders and our organizational leaders were very smart in their initial responses to this environment. And frankly, we got lucky, you know. The students were away on spring break when it hit. They didn't have to come back and crowd our residences and so on. So well, we did get lucky, but we are at phase 1. Phase 2 is where I think most people would hope we would be this summer. I'm a little doubtful. I think that probably will be the fall, and we'll still be dealing with very limited crowd sizes. Phase 3, that's when everything opens up, and that's going to be a while. That's really waiting upon the 3 silver bullet events that I've outlined below. First, the distribution of PPE equipment and systems. If we can't protect the front line, if our systems don't seem to have the infrastructure required to deal with an outbreak, the government won't let us move to phases 2 and 3. Access to testing and access to and the comprehensiveness of any vaccine obviously will have a huge impact on our ability to reopen. The potential problem areas for business in Kingston in particular, limitations on capacity to serve. This isn't just a reduction in the number of tables in the restaurant. Think about Kingston in the summer. We are a patio-driven community. People love to sit on patios. And ask yourself, when you sit on those patios, how much room do you have relative to the next table and relative to people walking on the street? Who knows? We may not even be able to have patios this summer, at least not servicing people in the way that we traditionally have. Capacities will be down. It's going to have a huge impact on our restaurant business and bar business. There will be debt obligations. People won't have all the money that they used to have. And some of the money that they do have will be spent on the cost of their own protection. And businesses will face a higher cost of protection in terms of compensation, checkout and delivery costs, and the like. And then fourth big problem for area will be consumer perception of prices. There will be a lot of presumption of gouging. You're going to have to explain to people, in some cases, why prices are what they are. When we think about stage two, and that's really where we talk about winning back customers. And let's be honest here, let's be very clear. Stage two, when we open the doors, there's going to be a short-term burst of buying interest. There is no doubt in my mind. Do not judge this presentation by what you see in terms of traffic levels for the first 2-3 weeks post-COVID-19, because people are going to want to just get out and have a drink. They're going to want to get out and buy stuff that they couldn't buy before. The only question is whether they're going to have the resources to buy. And so what you may find is big crowds coming in to look around, but not necessarily big crowds being there with the resources to buy your products. The easiest winners are probably going to be the places that we have typically looked at as icons of the community. You know, the Shea Piggies, the Panchenkos. They cater to a higher income consumer. They have a very different and unique characteristic, and the demographics would suggest that there are enough of those high income consumers that those businesses might go back to the old normal, albeit with reduced capacity in this environment. Those who are basically serving up quick meals, that's going to be a very, very different experience. The good folks at McKinsey put together this chart, working with the folks from Oxford Economics, really talking about what's going to happen in terms of the focus on safeguarding livelihoods and the focus on safeguarding lives. And as you can see, navigating the crisis where we are right now, the biggest primary focus has been on safeguarding lives. But you're already starting to see now that in some places, irrationally, they're basically saying it's more important to get the economy going than it is to focus on saving lives right now. And so you're going to start to see staggered easing of social distancing. They're going to try and identify high versus low risk groups. So for example, in New York State, which is the greatest incidence of COVID-19, New York City will be locked down for a long time. When you get into upper state New York, where the incidence of COVID has been much smaller, they'll probably reopen sooner. The same will be true, I think, in Ontario. Toronto will be locked down longer than Kingston will be. And Kingston will probably be locked down longer than Napanee or Brockville, just because of the impact of size. Regardless, these are the conditions that we'll have to operate with: continued increase in online ordering, cautious return to retail with high hygiene and distancing expectations, lower spending, and a lot more saving. I thought this was an interesting chart to include. This comes from the good folks at Ogilvy Advertising and Environics Research. They asked Canadians, what are you looking forward to doing once COVID-19 is over? And the answer came back, 52%, getting back to my routine. Getting back to my routine. Only 17% said I want to take a trip. Only 12% said I'd be dying to go to a restaurant and have a meal and a drink. Only 3% said I really got to get to a sports sports contest of some kind. 3% said, I can't wait for my kids to get back to school so I don't have to babysit them all the time. And only 1% said attending the concert. Going out and buying stuff isn't what Canadians are most looking forward to. They are looking forward to getting back to a routine, and maybe that routine included dining out and going to sports contests and the like. But the fact is, it wasn't top of mind. It wasn't their first thought. They're not hungry for anything right now except some sense of normalcy. And when we think about what that normalcy is going to look like moving to the so-called next normal, here's the big shifts. Price sensitivity, more digital engagement, more things done virtually and than reality, attention to hygiene and wellness, a lot more nesting at home, and a lot of businesses pivoting, changing what it is they're doing. Restaurants are becoming convenience stores, for example. Restaurants in some municipalities are not taking patrons and giving them tables anymore. They're simply takeout and delivery services. In fact, if we look at what's happened with restaurant meals in the US over the last quarter, 75% of outside food expenditures are going to national chains as opposed to going to local restaurants. That's $3 out of every 4 that's being spent. And in the States, ever since I think it's 2015, expenditures on eating out, in fact, were greater than expenditures for grocery products. This is within the US. I don't think you're going to see a return to those days anymore. You're going to see more eating at home, more nesting, more redefinition of purpose, and we will have to adapt in order to deal with it. Here's the 2 big battlegrounds I think we worry about in Kingston: e-commerce versus bricks and mortar. And let's be clear, COVID did not bring about e-commerce. The e-commerce move, the e-commerce trend was already well in place long before COVID hit us. What COVID did, however, is there were a lot of people who were kind of laggards or late adopters. I don't know. I really like to touch the goods. I like to be there, be in the moment. I like to select my produce myself. Well, they didn't have a choice anymore. They had to deal with e-commerce. And normally when that happens, these laggards and late adopters start to discover maybe it's not quite as bad as I thought it was. Maybe it's okay. And if they go that route, it's going to be hard to get them back. The convenience of e-commerce will become experienced. Parcel security, which is one of the things that we always would tell consumers, it's a reason why to buy local. You buy a shipment, you better be home. Well, during periods of self-isolation, nobody experienced problems with parcel security because you were home. Local could come to mean expedited possession, though. Local means you can get it when you want it. You don't have to wait 3 days, and you certainly don't have to wait 3 weeks. Unfortunately for local, the desire to feel, touch, and smell have been likely reduced and may even be seen as a negative. We always said the reason you go to a store is to experience the goods in a way that you can't online. Nowadays, that kind of feel, touch, smell, that could be seen as a reason not to go to the store. And then I think one that is of concern to everybody in every region of Canada, and that is that large national and regional firms will come to dominate smaller independent firms. Consumers who are moving towards higher price sensitivity and price awareness, in order to meet their price requirements, to give them the low prices they want, we need cost efficiencies, we need buyer power, we need scale. And small firms just don't have that. And large firms have a war chest. They can dedicate time and money to employees, to hygiene and delivery. I'll give you a simple example. Let's suppose that you're a retail store downtown and you want to put up plexiglass shields around your cash register. Well, you're going to have to design what your shield is going to look like. You're going to have to pay somebody to come in and custom build it. You're going to buy materials in relatively small quantities, and so you're going to pay a relatively higher price for all of those materials. That simple shield is going to cost you a fair bit of money. By contrast, a Walmart, a Costco, that decision of a shield will be made centrally and will be made in order to satisfy global demand. They will walk in and with a design and ask for best price on, I don't know, 1 million units. Who do you think has higher costs? Who do you think has the better ability to bite those costs and still give the consumer lower prices? And so, you never really tend to think of small stores being value-based, but according to most consulting firms, that's what the majority of consumers are going to be looking for. And if you've been up to Costco anytime in the last couple of weeks and absorbed the hour wait just to get in, you'll know what I mean. We're also seeing, and this talks to the availability issue, large firms are already sending out memos to their suppliers saying, when your product becomes available again, don't forget who your biggest customers are. Both Loblaws and Walmart, we already know, it's been confirmed, they have sent letters to their suppliers telling them, if you want our business long-term, you have to give us first priority to these products. And that's going to work hard against smaller firms. For small firms to justify their price premium, the key is don't sell what can be sold at Walmart or Loblaws. You're going to have to focus your products on areas that are really unique products where perhaps the demand is too small or too geographically concentrated for a Walmart or a Loblaws to want to venture. You're going to have to augment your product with pre and post-sale services, clearly. If all the consumer is doing is picking up a product and paying for it, e-commerce is going to be a formidable competitor. And then finally, you're going to have to set the stage for stage 3. And stage 3 is the revival. And quickly look at a couple of things with revival. First of all, how will consumer expenditures change? Well, we don't know for sure, but let's take a quick look. I think that the cost of shelter is probably going to go up. I think rents will go up, availability will go up, the home will become more important, and we may start to see a larger portion funneled that way. I think income taxes will probably go up. Somehow we have to recover all of this debt. Transportation is a tough one. I think it may come down, at least short term, because of what's happening with oil prices and people aren't traveling. But we aren't seeing, for example, insurance companies willing to give rebates on car insurance because your car isn't being used. Food expenditures, I suspect food expenditures are going to go up, and that's largely because of supply chain shortages, especially short term. We heard just today, that Alberta's largest meat processing plants are being closed down. There's going to be shortages, and as a consequence, whether you consume your steak or pork chop at home or in a restaurant, you're going to be paying more for it. Household operations, I think, will consume a bigger portion of our budget just because we're going to be spending more time at home. And so there may be things that we are no longer willing to put up with. Recreation is a hard one. I think the number will probably stay the same. What'll change is whether it's recreation at home versus recreation away from home. Clothing and accessories. Clothing and accessories probably will go down, and that's just because of the reduction in social occasions. Here's an important one for those of you from charities. We already know that there was tremendous donor fatigue. We already know that requests for contributions are increasingly growing into a concentrated portion of society that have the money. And you can understand that given the diversity of income that we showed you a little bit earlier. I think what you're going to see here is a real fragmentation. You will continue to see some big hitters making large gifts, but what you will probably need to rely upon is a lot of $5 and $10 contributions, because that'll be as much as people can afford. And the best demonstration of that, I think, was the Stronger Together concert. They weren't asking for hundreds. The specific request was $5, $10, or $20 for a food bank. That may be where you see the action. Household furnishings and equipment, it will go up. Education will go up. If not because we do more of it, then I think the price of education is going to go up because we too will have diminished capacity in our classrooms, more complex technology required to service people and the like. Healthcare, way up for obvious reasons. Personal care, I don't think will change. Tobacco products, alcoholic beverages, I would include in there, by the way, marijuana will go up. They're already going up. It is one of the consequences, I think. I can't remember the exact number, if it was 20 or 30%, but we know that the sale of tobacco and alcohol has risen during this isolation period. Reading matters, printed material naturally will go up. And I actually think games of chance will go up. When you get desperate and you don't have a choice, $2, $5 for a chance to be free of this, it may prove to be irresistible, but we'll wait and see. Certainly games of chance are now available online. You don't have to go to the store anymore, and that may change our behavior. These next two slides I thought are interesting. These come from the good folks at Ogilvy, and they talk about, when we come out of this, think about who your customer is and how they think about the world. Because how they think about the world will give you an insight as to whether or not they are good people to advertise to, or whether you need to rely upon some other way of reaching them. And what we're seeing is that the people for whom advertising does not work, these are the people who see the world as complex. They are overcome with anxiety, and so they're looking to simplify, and they're turning minimalist. And they don't want to hear about the kinds of things that we have traditionally focused on in advertising, the customer service, how important they are, we build our business one customer at a time, and the like. The good news for Kingston is that if you think about the folks who are more open to advertising, it is folks who are not like their parents' grandparents. I am 66, almost 67 years old. I will punch in the mouth anybody who says I am a senior citizen the way my grandparents were senior citizens. I'm not. I'd like to think I'm more adaptable to complexity. I definitely pursue intensity. I long have had a joy of consumption. I can shop for sport, and advertising for me is definitely a stimulus. If you're selling to me, you're going to have lots of opportunity to reach me with messages that fit what I want to be as I become an older, not senior, but older Canadian. By contrast, if you're servicing this kind of consumer, I would start looking for other things, or maybe not even advertising at all, and taking that money and reallocating it to reducing your prices. How will Kingston respond? Well, there's the last couple of slides. And I think this is an important point. I've been in Kingston 38 years. I have sat in on sessions and been a part of sessions where we've made all kinds of demands of city council and the mayor to do this or do that. But the reality is, this is not up to city council. The future of Kingston will be decided by us, the consumers. We're not going to vote. Well, we will vote, but we're going to vote with our wallets. We will decide where we're prepared to pay a little bit more to safeguard local supply, where they're going to make decisions about whether or not it is worth it to us to have a wide array of diverse stores, a broader assortment. We're going to have to decide how much local retail therapy do we need. And once we make those decisions, we'll have to back it up with our purchase power. If I was in business today, I have to realize that I'm going to have to do some serious customer re-education as to what we're doing and why we're doing it and what our future holds. And the problem we have there is we are mostly small businesses. We just don't have the resources to do it. And we certainly don't have the resources to manage a centralized program. So what does it mean? Well, it means groups like downtown merchants are going to become really important, not just to sponsor events, but really to form marketing consortia. You know, it is cheaper for a group of you to come together and buy a one-page ad in the WIG than it is for you to do so by yourself, right? Clearly, you're not going to have to bear all of that expense on your own, and yet you'll still get the coverage. Our local merchants are going to have to talk to each other. You're going to have to put your competition, your competitive spirit a little bit on the back burner. For a period of time, this is a case where we all survive or we all go under. We're going to have to watch consumers. We're going to have to be careful to see what kinds of changes they're demonstrating pre versus COVID. And that'll be something we'll talk about in the networking sessions and in our social media. And then finally, if you haven't already done it, you have to identify that 20% of customers that probably represents 80% of your business. Focus on those best customers. Even if it's direct communication, one-to-one, phone calls, email, whatever it takes, you have to show them that you want a relationship with them, that they didn't just represent a transaction. If we're not prepared to take care of these kinds of activities, and this is one of the things that I think the mayor's new committee on reopening Kingston, one of the things they could help us do here, because it will really take a joint effort. If we're not prepared to do that, well, then we know what the alternative will be. It'll be exactly what they laid out in Atlantic Magazine. It doesn't have to be that way in Kingston, but for it to happen, it means consumers, it means business, and it means government has to come together, because it really does take a community to grow a local economy. Thanks very much, and be happy to answer any questions you've got now. Lori, if you're going to curate questions, I'll let you fire them away, and I'll give you my best response.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks very much, Ken. Thanks for the presentation. Just a reminder to everyone that we will be posting Ken's slides and a recording of today's webinar on the website, and we'll email you back with that link. And Ken, maybe I'll just ask you to take off your share screen. And we've got a few questions underway, and we don't have a lot of time left. Got about 5 minutes, so a couple of quick ones. Ken, what's your advice for businesses that offer services in the space of seniors living and moving?
Get together and form an association. You know, this is a time of some opportunity for Kingston. We have a large senior population. One of the things we know is that COVID has had its greatest impact in long-term and retirement care homes. We could be an area of excellence, a center of excellence for the treatment of seniors. We could be doing things in our stores and in our downtown to make it easy for somebody of that age group to feel safe, to feel secure, to be able to access services. I don't know if it has to do with the height of chairs or the temperature or what have you, but we could really become a place where people come, you know, in order for that long-term elder care. And places like Queens and St. Lawrence, we could be setting up programs specifically to do this. Stanford today, for example, in the States, has announced 3 new programs just dealing with COVID-19. That's how great the impact they see is. We could certainly become a center of excellence, but it's not just one store. If you want seniors to visit you, you're going to have to provide them with a safe destination, a place where they can do more than just one thing.
Okay, great. We've got a question about the real estate market. What's your view on what's going to happen in real estate? So far, it's been good on the price front, but will many people decide just to wait until next year? So for some, home has become a refuge during the COVID crisis, and they've been improving their homes. But on the other hand, there'll be those who are over leveraged and have to sell. Thoughts on that?
Well, I guess a lot will depend here on banks and a certain amount on government. You know, interest rates have fallen, but mortgage rates have not kept pace with those falling interest rates. And so I don't think we can necessarily say that housing has become more affordable as a result of low, almost negative interest rates. Kingston has a vacancy problem. We know that there aren't enough units that people can rent. And so I think landlords and people who are selling homes may find a larger number of defaults than they previously had. I think if you have commercial space downtown, for example, get ready, you're going to see a reduction in the number of stores, unfortunately. And that means that certain space is going to go unproductive. As far as home renovations go, I think there it's just a question of how much money do you have? If you're strapped already, you're certainly not going to be doing a whole lot of home renovation. If, however, you're making a six-figure salary and living in a six-figure home, a high six-figure home, you probably are going to look at your kitchen and bathrooms and that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks. We have time for just one more question. How do you think social distancing will affect the psyche of potential tourists? For example, will they be willing to visit attractions?
So I think social distancing, coming back to the real estate question, is a huge one, right? You're seeing already in that industry innovative ways of showing homes, because I don't want somebody with COVID coming through my home. And certainly I don't want to be touring through a home I know isn't necessarily hygienic. And so that's already creating some problems for real estate agents. And the same problems I think will exist for all service providers. Social distancing isn't going to go away in the near term. You're going to see people in mass. You're going to see people maintaining distance and staying away from things that require congregation. So, for example, in my own home, we have already canceled two major trips that we were going to undertake this year, and one that we were going to undertake next year, because major tourism, of course, involves some considerable lead time. All of that is off the table right now. So we are going to see a reduction in tourism. And when you combine that natural reduction in tourism with the cancellation or postponement of Homecoming and Feb Fest and Blues Fest and so on, unfortunately, what we'll see are some retail stores, some restaurants and bars barely making profit at a time of year when they typically make the majority of their profit.
Okay, thank you, Ken. We're going to just before we wrap up, we have I have three quick points to make. One, first of all, showing on your screen right now is next week's webinar. It's going to be a Tuesday, May 5th, instead of Wednesday, but at the same time, 4 o'clock. It'll be Professor Shay Dubé, who's an expert in negotiations and also an accomplished teacher in our MBA and master's programs, talking about effective negotiating strategies for success with banks, creditors, and others. We'll be sending you a link to register for that session. And also want to remind everyone that we do have a consulting service as part of our partnership with the city, the Smith partnership with the City of Kingston and Kingston Economic Development. We are offering our business students as consultants to support organizations and businesses in the Kingston region as you navigate through the challenges of COVID-19. Please go to that website that I've been referring to, smithqueens.com/KingstonBusiness, which is where you registered for this webinar. You can go there to find out more and to register your organization. Third and final item is we would love to get your feedback on your top 3 challenges right now that you're dealing with the pandemic in your organization. What your answers will do is help us offer relevant webinars in the future and also take a pulse on what's happening in our region. We're going to open up that final poll. And here's the question. What are the 3 major challenges for your business or organization right now? You can select up to 3. It is a multiple choice. And please note there are a total of 10 choices. So use your scroll bar down the right side of that polling question. Take your time. We're going to leave it open for a few minutes after the webinar wraps up. And speaking of wrapping up, Ken, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your wealth of knowledge as always. Thank you for doing this with us today. And to everyone who joined us, from Smith School of Business at Queen's, thank you very much for tuning in. We hope to see you next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. Please take care.